They crossed a line they never should have. They did not attack his pride, nor did they ruin his reputation. They nearly killed his loyal dog, and if you know the legend of John Wick, you already know the absolute carnage that follows. Because the young man they are tormenting right now, the weak, pathetic, exiled college student, that is nothing but an empty vessel. The soul burning within him once belonged to the supreme martial master of the entire continent, feared, untouchable, a living legend until his most trusted comrades stabbed him in the back and left his corpse to rot. But now, he has returned, reborn into the absolute weakest trash of a prestigious martial clan, relentlessly tormented by his peers, and coldly discarded by his own bloodline. Yet, he retains his memories, his lethal battle instincts, his towering pride. So, when his enemies cross the ultimate line and harm the one life he swore to protect, the former supreme sovereign stops holding back. The title of today's manhwa is "The Clan's Failure is the Former Strongest in the Continent." If this premise caught your attention, drop a like, hit subscribe, and let us dive straight into the action. Enjoy the ride. The absolute strongest cultivator across the Lua continent was a supreme master named Makuto Yaimorai. During the darkest era, he became the continent's savior, crushing the Demon King's army and ending a worldwide catastrophe. The Grand Crusade was a complete success. Or so he truly believed. Just as they prepared their next tactical move, cold steel pierced flesh, Makuto was viciously stabbed in the back by the two brothers in arms he trusted most. After saving the entire world, his only reward was a fatal betrayal. His mind spun in disbelief. Burning with agonizing fury, he roared out for a reason. And just before his vision went black, he made one final blood-soaked vow. He swore to drag every last traitor down to the deepest pits of hell. Then, the world vanished into darkness. But when Makuto finally opened his eyes again, he was not in the underworld. A crowd of students loomed over him, casually reporting to their instructor that he was awake. A female teacher leaned in close, checking to see if he was all right. Makuto stared in pure confusion. His heart had stopped beating. He was supposed to be dead. Yet, he did not recognize a single face. He did not recognize this strange world. For a brief second, he wondered if this was the afterlife. Then, mocking voices pierced his thoughts. One student sneered, laughing at how fainting during a simple exam proved just how pathetic the young master of the Yaimori family truly was. Another scoffed, reminding everyone that he was already banished from the clan. Calling him young master was a complete and utter joke. A girl clinging tightly to a man named Kitama refused to even glance at Makuto. She impatiently demanded the exam continue. She was entirely focused on watching Kitama shatter yet another record. Kitama flashed an arrogant smile, promising he would deliver. The instructor loudly announced the test would resume, and in that exact moment, an overwhelming flood of unfamiliar memories crashed into Makuto's brain. The truth struck like lightning. He had been reincarnated. This was not the Lua continent. This was an entirely different universe. And he was now living inside the body of Makuto Yaimori. This new Makuto was born into a highly prestigious bloodline, but his martial meridians were completely blocked. His physical body was frail. When his parents passed away, his own clan discarded him. He was cast out. However, unlike the Lua continent, the inhabitants of this modern world had absolutely no concept of cultivation. A mystical energy existed in the atmosphere here, a profound power known as chi. But ordinary humans merely coexisted with it. They possessed zero knowledge of how to absorb it into their cores. They had no idea how to wield it. But the Supreme Master did. He could sense the spiritual energy immediately. It was thin and faint, but undeniably familiar. Acting on pure instinct, he circulated the chi through his weak vessel. And in a fraction of a second, the massive blockage in his meridians violently shattered. His frail muscles surged with power, and his physical frame expanded. His martial foundation firmly stabilized. He had successfully broken through to the first stage of cultivation. His ultimate mission was now crystal clear. He would reclaim his lost power, ascend back to the Lua continent, and exact vengeance upon every traitor. But for now, he had to tread carefully. This fragile vessel remained at the first stage. So, he decided to use the upcoming trial to test his absolute physical limits. A classmate nervously asked if he was all right. Makuto calmly declared his intent to run the 100-meter sprint. The classroom erupted in laughter. They mocked him, pointing out that Kitama was up next. The undisputed school record holder. a prodigy already guaranteed a sports university recommendation. In other words, an opponent entirely out of his league. Kitama sneered in disgust. He called Makuto utter trash, mocking him for finally throwing away his remaining pride. Makuto offered no response. He knew his current power was only at the first stage of cultivation, but that was more than enough. A cultivator's body possesses an aptitude that utterly shatters ordinary human limits. A student announced the matchup, Makuto versus Kitama. No one dared to face the champion, so Makuto stepped forward. They took their starting positions. The instructor raised his hand. Get ready. Kitama locked his gaze on the finish line, certain of an easy victory. The signal fired. Kitama exploded forward. Yet Makuto stood completely still. He counted. 1. The crowd howled with laughter. 2. The mocking grew louder. 3. 3 seconds was more than enough. Makuto vanished. When cultivators first descended upon the Lu continent, they shattered the world's common sense. Their speed, strength, and perception existed entirely outside the realm of human limits. In a mere instant, Makuto erased the gap. Panic seized Kitama as he pushed his mortal body to its absolute limit. But it was entirely useless. Makuto counted again. 1, 2, 3. He crossed the finish line. Absolute silence fell. The teacher stared blankly at the stopwatch. 9.88 seconds, a legendary new record. Kitama collapsed to his knees in despair. His mind simply could not process the defeat. Makuto calmly evaluated his physical state. Compared to his former peak, it was nothing. Yet, the aptitude was absolutely flawless. This was merely the beginning. And once again, Makuto Yamore set his sights on the absolute summit. The cultivator Makuto Yamore was once the strongest existence on the Lua continent. In a mere 50 years of cultivation, he crushed countless legendary experts. By the age of 65, he broke through to the 11th stage of cultivation, standing uncontested at the absolute pinnacle of the continent. However, after slaughtering the Demon King's invading army, his only reward was a blade in the back. Now, Makuto stood quietly inside a school restroom, staring at his weak reflection in the mirror. This vessel was incredibly frail. To fully return to the first stage of cultivation as quickly as possible, he required special spiritual medicines. But there was one massive obstacle. They were outrageously expensive, extremely expensive. And when he checked the bank account left behind by this body's original owner, the pathetic balance wasn't even close to enough. His next brilliant plan was to craft and sell talismans. But brutal reality struck once more. He lacked the funds for even the most basic materials. Still, one absolute truth remained. For the sake of his bloody revenge, he had to acquire wealth by any means necessary. Suddenly, Kitama swaggered into the restroom. Trailing behind him were several terribly familiar faces. Kitama, the humiliated track and field captain. And right beside him stood Haru Osaki, the boxing club captain. They snickered maliciously as Kitama brought up the embarrassing stunt Makuto had pulled on the track. Then, the sinister motive for their visit was revealed. This month's protection fee. Pathetic memories flooded Makuto's mind. This weak body had suffered extortion for years. Precious money stolen under the laughable guise of protection. They had just bled him dry last week. Kitama narrowed his venomous eyes. Something about Makuto's aura felt dangerously off. Sensing this, he waved Haru forward instead. Against a piece of trash like him, a single blow would be more than enough. Haru unleashed a brutal swing. The old Makuto would have gritted his teeth and suffered in silence. But those days were over. Makuto calmly stepped aside. To his awakened senses, the punch crawled. He countered in a flash, driving his fist straight into Haru's jaw. In the eyes of a true cultivator, even a boxing club captain was nothing but a fragile mortal. Before a single gasp could escape, Makuto pivoted and delivered a devastating kick to Akira. The lackey's head violently slammed against the wall. He crumbled instantly. Hot and Kitama froze in sheer terror. Their minds could not process the overwhelming display. Makuto fixed his chilling gaze upon them. "Are you terrified?" Kitama desperately screamed for him to shut up. Both he and Hot charged forward in blind panic. Makuto effortlessly caught their soaring fists mid-air. Then, his grip tightened. Agonizing screams echoed through the room. A faint, merciless smile crossed Makuto's face. "There is no need to rush. Let us savor this pain slowly." Kitama's mind shattered in panic. He wailed that they were wrong, begging for mercy. Makuto forcefully shoved them aside. They stumbled backward, trembling uncontrollably. In that exact moment, Haru forced his broken body up. Blood stained his face, while pure rage burned in his eyes. He launched himself forward once more. Makuto did not even blink. A single devastating strike. Haru was sent flying through the air, crashing into a restroom stall and shattering it completely. His face was left brutally mangled. Makuto stared down at the fallen bullies. "Next time, you will not escape so easily." Katama shrieked in horror, calling him a monster. Hot scrambled to spit out desperate apologies. Katama begged him to stay back. That was when Makuto's chilling voice pierced the room. "Return exactly what belongs to me." They froze in absolute dread. The demand did not register at first. Makuto's aura turned bone-chillingly cold. "Every single thing you stole from me." Katama's face drained of all color. He swore to return it all, down to the very last coin. After claiming his rightful funds, Makuto turned and vanished. The second his overwhelming presence faded, they frantically dragged Haru to the clinic. Makuto knew his actions were extreme, but he was certain those cowards would never dare speak a word. To a cultivator, the academy was a burden. Far too many mortals, far too many prying eyes. He would depart when the moment aligned with his fate. But for now, he finally possessed the wealth he needed. Enough to acquire low-grade mystical materials. Enough to forge fundamental spiritual talismans. Enough to take his first true step on the path of vengeance. These spiritual talismans were essential tools wielded by low-level cultivators. By channeling spiritual energy into specific earthly materials, one could forge items radiating with mystical power. In fact, even a cultivator at the very first stage of chi refining could craft them effortlessly. Makuto initiated the crafting process. The outcome was an absolute triumph. He forged an entire batch of talismans, each pulsating with vibrant, otherworldly light. If he could successfully trade them all away, true wealth would finally be his. Enough to secure potent medicinal herbs and claim a sacred sanctuary for his cultivation. However, mortal reality proved to be far more unforgiving. Makuto remained. Trapped at the first stage of chi refining, 3 grueling weeks slipped by, yet not a single talisman was sold. The ordinary masses eyed his wares with deep suspicion. Some even openly mocked him. Others completely ignored the treasures, walking blindly away. One day, while training his mortal body, a heavy thud caught Makuto's attention. He turned to find a battered dog collapsed on the desolate roadside. Its body was critically injured. Crimson blood soaked its matted fur. The creature's strength faded right before his eyes. Judging by the devastating wounds, a vehicle had mercilessly struck it down. Makuto hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then, he drew a glowing talisman. It was partly an act of mercy, and partly a crucial test of his spiritual art. The sacred seal he wielded was forged specifically to mend ruptured organs and shattered bones. As pure spiritual energy surged into the dying creature, its chaotic breathing stabilized. The fatal wounds miraculously sealed, and the shattered bones fused back into place. Mere moments later, the dog stood up. Completely reborn, it happily wagged its tail as Makuto gently patted its head. Suddenly, unfamiliar voices echoed from the nearby shadows. The rescued dog unleashed a fierce, warning growl. Makuto raised his gaze as 2 figures approached. One was Sho Wada, sole heir to the mighty Wada family. Beside him stood Shizuru Saga, only daughter of the prestigious Saga bloodline. Sho scoffed with absolute disdain. "It is just a dog. Let it die." Shizuru froze in disbelief. Fury flashed in her eyes as she demanded to know how he could be so cruel, especially since he was the one who dragged her out here in the first place. She ordered him to take the injured animal to a hospital. But then, an eerie silence fell. The supposedly dying creature was completely fine. It rested calmly in Makuto's arms, untouched by death. Shizuru stood paralyzed by shock. She vividly remembered the beast being drenched in blood just moments ago. Her trembling voice asked what he had done. Sho narrowed his eyes with heavy suspicion, demanding to know the stranger's true identity. Makuto ignored him, his eyes locking onto Shizuru's bag. It bore a hospital crest. A sudden realization struck him like lightning. The perfect opportunity had arrived. He revealed a glowing talisman. Shizuru gasped in awe as she recognized the protective charm. Sho immediately blocked her path, accusing Makuto of being a cheap fraud. He warned her not to fall for such obvious lies. He even dared to accuse Makuto of harming the dog himself. But Shizuru cut through his rant with a desperate question. "Can this power heal humans?" Her voice trembled as she pushed further. Could it awaken someone from a deep, vegetative sleep? Makuto presented the spiritual paper. He calmly detailed its miraculous effects. Sho let out a nervous, mocking laugh. He scoffed that a mere piece of paper could never cure a dying patient. He begged her to wake up to reality. Makuto completely ignored the fool. The method is simple, he stated. Just place it near the afflicted. Then, he laid out his terms. Large talismans cost 400,000 yen. Smaller ones are 200,000. Shizuru did not hesitate for a single second. I will buy them all. 1,000,000 yen. Sho looked at her like she had lost her mind. Enraged, he lunged at Makuto, screaming at him to back off. Makuto caught his strike with zero effort. Cold panic gripped Sho. He was completely trapped. An icy aura radiated from Makuto's eyes. Do not interfere with my business. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed Sho to the dirt. Makuto accepted the check and handed over the spiritual items. The yellow seal offers absolute protection. The red seal unleashes pure destruction. I pray you never need the red one. Shizuru bowed with profound gratitude. As the mysterious youth walked away, she desperately called out for his name. Without stopping, he spoke into the wind. I am Makuto Yaomore. Behind him, Sho continued to scream his pathetic curses, branding it all a massive fraud. Shizuru knew it defied all logic. But even if the chance was agonizingly small, if there was even a sliver of hope that her mother could open her eyes again, she was willing to risk everything. Meanwhile, the little dog trotted loyally behind Makuto. He allowed the beast to follow. His mind sharpened as he walked. With this sudden wealth, he could finally secure a sanctuary. His next mission was hunting down spiritual herbs. Suddenly, a sharp bark broke his focus. The dog was glaring at a nearby estate. Makuto narrowed his eyes, sensing something hidden. Raw spiritual energy was bleeding from the very soil. And then, he spotted it thriving in the shadows of the garden. Silver heart grass. Meanwhile, Sho lay pathetically in a hospital bed, his arm heavily bound in bandages. Even as the doctors tended to his wounds, his venomous ranting echoed through the room. He cursed the vile scammer who dared to humiliate him. He swore a bloody oath of vengeance if their paths ever crossed again. Just outside the door, a shadowy figure listened. A menacing aura surrounded the man who had heard every pathetic word. The fact that Sho had wandered the streets with Shizuru was an absolute insult to his pride. This imposing man was Kenji Suga, the ruthless councilman of Kongai City and Shizuru's own father. He had already unleashed his fury upon her, mocking her for falling victim to a con artist's silver tongue. He declared she had brought shame upon their entire bloodline. Standing in the cold hallway, the nurses exchanged mocking whispers. They quietly scoffed, sneering that even a councilman's daughter could be so utterly foolish. Shizuru tightly clenched her trembling fists. She desperately pleaded for just one more try, just this once. This was her absolute final chance. She firmly refused to surrender without exhausting every single possibility. Kenji's patience finally shattered into pure fury. He roared at her to stop this instant. He scoffed that she would be praying to ghosts and deities next, unable to believe his own flesh and blood could be so naive. At those harsh words, Shizuru finally snapped. She fiercely demanded to know what he had actually done to help. She coldly exposed his constant neglect, pointing out his rare visits to her ailing mother. Her mother had been trapped in a deep coma, yet he barely showed his face. She then confessed her own agonizing regret. A bitter regret for failing to bring her mother to the hospital sooner, and she utterly refused to accept his excuses, claiming he had done everything in his power. She delivered the brutal truth without hesitation. If her mother actually passed away, he would just act like nothing happened and comfortably return to his normal life. Blinded by sudden rage, Kenji raised his hand to strike her. But mid-air, he completely froze. The sudden shock of his own violent impulse paralyzed him. After a tense, breathless moment, his hand slowly dropped. His expression turned entirely cold and rigid. The fierce girl standing before him felt like a complete stranger. She had grown far too insolent and fiercely stubborn. Turning his back, he coldly declared he would summon the nurse to pull the life support. She screamed for him to stop, desperately throwing herself toward her mother's bedside. She tightly gripped her mother's freezing hand, while her other hand swiftly unveiled the mysterious talisman. She swore to never give up. Instantly, the ancient talisman ignited with power, bathing the room in a gentle, ethereal light. Out of nowhere, a frail voice broke the heavy silence, calling her name. Her mother's lifeless hand twitched, tenderly stroking her daughter's head. Kenji violently spun around. All color completely drained from his face, he frantically charged forward in pure disbelief. Utterly baffled, he demanded to know what was happening. Yoko slowly opened her heavy eyes, offering a weak, gentle smile. She softly whispered that her daughter had grown far too thin. Kenji bolted into the hallway, desperately screaming for a doctor. The emotional floodgates finally broke, and Shizuru's tears poured down. But this time, they were tears of overwhelming relief. Kenji crashed back through the doors, roaring to the staff that his wife had awakened. A massive wave of doctors and nurses immediately flooded the ward. Every single person stood frozen in absolute shock. Following a tense examination, the head doctor delivered the impossible verdict. With intense rehabilitation, in roughly 1.5 years, Yoko would fully reclaim her normal life. Shizuru declared the truth without a single ounce of hesitation. This miracle was entirely thanks to the talisman. A dead silence choked the room as every single eye locked onto her. Kenji frantically dismissed the event as a mere medical miracle. But Sho remained utterly paralyzed, completely unable to process the impossible sight. The bewildered doctor ordered a nurse to immediately page Professor Suzuki, an absolute titan in the medical world, and a nominee for a global prize. A sudden wave of dread washed over Sho's terrifyingly pale face. A bone-chilling realization suddenly struck his mind. What if that supposed con artist was actually a true hidden master? Shizuru threw her arms around her mother in a desperate, loving embrace. Yoko softly apologized for inflicting such unbearable pain. Shizuru beamed a radiant smile through her endless tears, simply grateful that her mother had finally awakened from the darkness. Deep within her soul, she forged an ironclad vow. If destiny ever allowed her to cross paths with that mysterious man again, she would repay her life debt to the absolute fullest. Meanwhile, far away, Makuto finalized his move into his new domain. This was merely the first crucial step toward his glorious return to the Luya continent. The burning flames of their betrayal would never be forgiven. The bitter memories of that treachery would forever be etched into his very soul. But before claiming his vengeance, he absolutely needed to break through to Chi refining stage 11. This feat required the immense power of a spirit spring and sacred materials. The glorious day of reckoning was rapidly approaching. Makuto could feel its inevitable arrival humming deep within his veins. However, the natural spiritual energy of this pathetic world was steadily drying up. If this rapid decay continued unchecked, the sacred path of cultivation would be completely sealed forever. And if that absolute disaster truly struck, he would be hopelessly imprisoned in this fragile mortal realm. To shatter these earthly shackles, he desperately required a sanctuary or relic overflowing with pure spiritual power. Under normal circumstances, only mythical spirit springs, or incredibly rare spiritual materials held the key to solving this dire crisis. This was exactly why he had never once expected to stumble upon. Silver heartgrass flourished in a quiet residential garden. This was no ordinary herb. It was a rare spiritual material. Unlike basic medicinal plants, spiritual materials were vital for refining elixirs capable of elevating a cultivator's realm. If he could successfully refine a Jui pill using these silver heart grassberries, breaking through to the second stage of Chi refining would not be impossible, but acting recklessly would only backfire. A single mistake could irreparably damage his foundation and cripple his progress. Facing an uncertain path forward, Makuto chose the steady route of patience. For now, he focused entirely on stable cultivation. Later at the bustling market, Makuto sat quietly behind his stall, silently calculating his expenses. The ingredients required for a Jui pill were astronomically priced. Even if he liquidated every single asset he owned, it still would not be nearly enough. He had tried to sell his talismans under the radar, but trouble managed to track him down regardless. The thugs had returned. They kept their distance, watching from the shadows. They had been monitoring him since the third day his stall opened, and today their numbers had multiplied. This was not just random street harassment, it was a highly organized operation. Makuto grasped the situation immediately. They were finally making their move. Remaining perfectly calm, he packed up his stall and walked away. But before he could vanish into the dense crowd, a woman's voice called out to him. She recognized him instantly. She mentioned how she had not seen him at school recently. She asked what he was doing out here. She knew all about his painful expulsion from the Yayamori family. She knew his body was terribly weak. She knew he was struggling to survive, but she never imagined he would abandon his education completely. Makuto stared at her, recognizing the face. She was the very same classmate, who had once stood up to defend the original owner of this body. She even generously offered to lend him enough money to return to school and take the upcoming entrance exams. Makuto politely declined her offer. He stated he had urgent matters to handle, and turned away. But by the cold intensity for his eyes, she instinctively knew something was terribly wrong. Deep inside a narrow, dimly lit alleyway, Makuto stopped in his tracks. 7 enemies positioned on the left, 3 on the right, making 10 in total. He exhaled a slow, steady breath and made his move. The very second he broke into a sudden sprint, the thugs panicked and immediately gave chase. He deliberately led them straight into a dead end. They quickly surrounded him with their weapons fully drawn. Makuto turned to face them with chilling calmness. "Come at me all at once." The leader let out a dark laugh, absolutely thrilled by the arrogance. Makuto asked a single piercing question. Who had sent them? And why had they been spying on him for days? The leader simply sneered, mocking Makuto for being so utterly reckless. After severely offending a massive conglomerate, he still possessed the sheer audacity to sell his goods out in the open. They even mocked him, wondering why the young lady of the Amatani family had ever taken an interest in worthless trash like him. Makuto's eyes narrowed sharply at the name. Amatani Setsu. According to his fractured memories, the original Makuto had once been engaged to her. That engagement was mercilessly broken off right after he was declared physically weak and banished from his own family. It simply did not add up. Resorting to murder over a cancelled engagement? It was highly suspicious, but the truth could always be extracted by force. However, what Makuto failed to realize was that someone had trailed behind him. His concerned classmate. She had witnessed the entire terrifying scene unfold. The Yakuza, the gleaming weapons, the suffocating, killing intent in the air. Panic consumed her. There was absolutely no way he could win this fight. His body was far too frail. They were fully armed and dangerous. Trembling, she pulled out her phone and frantically dialed for help, but a rough hand suddenly snatched her wrist. A thug snarled in her face, demanding to know who she was calling. She let out a piercing scream, and every single head snapped in her direction. The heavy atmosphere shifted in an instant. A menacing figure stepped out from the group. It was the boss. He grabbed her viciously by the hair, dragging her forward into the light. Makuto finally locked eyes with her. Mochiyama. The boss let out a cruel laugh. He mocked Makuto for being so incredibly popular with women. Even with Setsu in the picture, he was still out here seducing other girls. Tears in her eyes, Mochi desperately shouted at Makuto to run for his life. She declared they had weapons. She swore they wouldn't dare lay a finger on her. She was the proud daughter of the Mochiyama family of Kyo. The thugs erupted into mocking laughter, and their boss leaned in close. "If we end you right here," he sneered, "not a single soul will ever know." A cold knife flashed in the darkness. The color drained from her face. "If you are going to blame someone," the boss mocked, "blame your own stupidity." In a flash, Makuto made his move. He vanished and reappeared beside them instantly, delivering a precise strike to the boss's wrist. The knife clattered against the ground. Makuto wanted to keep a low profile, but he seized the leader by the skull, slamming him ruthlessly into the solid wall. Mochiyama froze in absolute shock. She could hardly believe her own eyes. Was this truly Makuto? The thugs stood completely paralyzed. Every trace of amusement vanished from their faces. Makuto tightened his crushing grip and spoke with a chilling calm. "I will ask this only once. Who sent you?" Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, Officer Kaya answered an urgent dispatch. "The Scars are making their move." Kaya was inside his patrol car when the grim report came through. He immediately demanded the exact details. Over 30 men were swarming toward the back alleys of East Street. The incident involved a student, and there was one female hostage. Kaya slammed his foot onto the accelerator. He radioed for immediate reinforcements. Then, he issued one critical instruction. Do not notify Chief Unaga. He warned his colleague not to charge in blindly. These men were no ordinary criminals. They were ruthless drug dealers, people who would not hesitate to take a life. When his colleague remained silent, Kaya snapped, demanding a status update. Then, a trembling voice replied, "Reinforcements will not be necessary." Kaya froze in his seat. "What do you mean?" "That boy we mentioned earlier, he annihilated every single one of them." Back in the blood-stained alley, Makuto dug his fingers deeper into the boss's skull. The man wheezed for air, gasping out a question. Was Makuto truly the discarded trash of the Yamure family? He could not accept that the feared Scars had fallen so easily. Makuto's voice remained perfectly level. It was terrifyingly calm. He demanded to know where the intel came from. Was it the Yamatani family or the Yamure family? Answer me in 3 seconds. The gang boss thrashed wildly. Makuto's grip grew tighter as bone began to creak. 3, 2, stop right there. Sirens wailed as police swarmed the alley. Officer Kaya stepped forward alongside his partner. He commanded Makuto not to take another step. If he crossed that bloody line, he would be no different from the thugs on the ground. Makuto shifted his cold gaze to the officers. Was this mere coincidence? Or strict inevitability? Tearing his way through the police would be effortless, but this was not the right moment. Exposing his true strength here was too risky. Makuto released his iron grip, letting the boss collapse and gasp for air. Kaya exhaled a heavy sigh of relief. They had arrived just in time, but deep down, his mind was reeling from the utter devastation. A single boy had decimated dozens of violent criminals. Kaya carefully approached and stated his name. Kaya Harui of the Naomi City Police. Makuto maintained his stoic silence. Mochiyama stepped up to answer in his place, as Kaya tried to reassure them both. He promised that Officer Rikokuhara Fumiya would handle everything. Makuto quietly understood the situation. The city's surveillance network was absolute. Official statements would be recorded later, and no unrelated questions would be asked. Suddenly, a harsh voice echoed through the dark alley. It is a good thing I showed up. A man stepped from the shadows, boasting cold eyes and an imposing posture. If I had not arrived, he sneered, the local police might have actually let these criminals walk free. He turned his piercing gaze directly toward Makuto. You are under arrest for assault. This man was Unaga Risu, Grade 2 Police Commissioner. He thrust an official arrest warrant into the air. Mochiyama immediately screamed out in fierce protest. They were the innocent victims. They were the ones ambushed. But Unaga completely ignored her pleas. From his twisted perspective, the student had brutally beaten the men. Hearing this, Kaya finally snapped. He grabbed Unaga by the collar, demanding he drop the blatant lies. He knew exactly who these dangerous men were, yet the corrupt official was intentionally twisting the truth. Unaga merely glared back with venomous intent. He asked when Ka dared to defy a superior, issuing a cold warning. One word, and his entire position would vanish. Ka spat back, calling him utterly despicable. Fumiya quickly restrained Kaya, desperately trying to calm his raging temper. That was when Makuto finally spoke. Take me. Ka stared at him in disbelief, asking if he was serious. But Makuto understood. Whoever was behind this had gone to great lengths to frame him. If he did not resolve this right now, the shadows would never stop hunting him, and it would severely interfere with his cultivation. Unaga smirked, mocking that Makuto was surprisingly cooperative for a criminal. Makuto simply tilted his head, then calmly asked, How did you know I was a student? Unaga froze, just for a fraction of a second, but that was enough. Makuto understood instantly. A mere lackey, not the true mastermind. He stepped closer, suggesting that perhaps they should deal with the person truly pulling the strings. Unaga laughed it off, ordering him to move. Makuto casually walked past him, then stopped and turned. He held up a single button. What a shame, he murmured. Unaga's face stiffened in shock. He had no idea when it was snatched from him. Makuto leaned in close. Next time. Taking a button will not be enough. Unaga burned that terrifying moment into his memory. Elsewhere, deep inside a dark detention facility, a lone prisoner sat facing the cold wall. A guard forcefully struck the iron bars, demanding his attention. You will be seeing someone soon, he announced. Makuto Yamorei. Then came the chilling order. Simple and cold, make sure he does not leave this place alive. Makuto was heavily escorted into his cell. The very moment the steel door shut, he felt it. Hostile gazes dripping with raw, killing intent. The men inside were not here to quietly coexist. They were here to butcher him. Makuto only found it amusing. At the far end of the gloomy cell, one man sat in absolute silence. He did not look eager or restless, which made his presence fiercely stand out. Makuto quietly studied him. So that is the executioner. The silent man finally spoke. He stated that for a long time, he had followed a single rule. He never laid a hand on ordinary people. To him, they were hopelessly weak, simply not worth it. He stood up, towering over every other inmate. I was hired to permanently dispose of you, he declared calmly. My name is Faki Zenji. He advised Makuto to give up and stop resisting, warning that fighting back would only prolong the agony. Makuto just tilted his head. Are you just someone's subordinate? From the very moment Zenji stood, Makuto had felt it. A sharp, stinging wave of pressure. He was in a weakened state right now, but even so, he could instantly recognize it. Raiatsu, Zenji smirked. He intended to end this in a single breath. He lunged forward, but Makuto completely vanished. Zenji's eyes widened in sheer shock. What? A heavy hand brutally slammed into his face, followed by Makuto's cold voice. You are deeply mistaken. The weak one in this room is you. Makuto ruthlessly drove him straight into the ground. The devastating impact violently rattled the cell block, but Zenji reacted fast. He grabbed Makuto's leg and yanked hard. Makuto was forcefully hurled across the room, yet he twisted midair and landed with perfect grace. Zenji clicked his tongue in frustration. He had completely underestimated his prey. Fine then, he fiercely growled. I will teach you a proper lesson. Makuto calmly stood near the iron door. Then, he vanished once again. In the very next fraction of a second, his fist buried itself deep into Zenji's abdomen. A dull, bone-crushing sound echoed out. Zenji's massive body folded in half. He violently crashed into the wall. The immense impact knocked every ounce of air from his lungs. Crimson blood sprayed wildly from his mouth. Before the giant could even attempt to recover, Makuto was already looming above him. Zenji barely raised his arms to defend, only to be sent flying by a devastating kick. Dust filled the cell as solid concrete cracked. Zenji desperately struggled to stand. Hot blood ran down his face, and dark bruises rapidly covered his battered body. Spitting out a violent curse, he recklessly charged forward. Makuto effortlessly sidestepped the attack and countered, delivering another crushing punch, deeper and far heavier than before. Zenji slammed mercilessly into the wall yet again. But this time, the giant stayed down. Absolute confusion flooded Zenji's trembling eyes. What in the world was happening? It defied all logic, yet Makuto had already materialized, looming right before his very eyes. Makuto raised his fist and brought it crashing down. Boom! The very earth beneath them violently shattered. Devastating fissures spiderwebbed across the floor. Zenji hacked and coughed violently. Crimson spilled from his lips, while uncontrollable tears of sheer agony streamed down his face. Makuto violently hoisted him by the collar. His voice was chillingly calm. Who is pulling the strings? Then he issued a final demand. One more thing. Where did you acquire your Ryatsu? Meanwhile, a panicked Una slammed his fist against the desk, his phone practically crushed against his ear. His features were completely twisted in sheer terror. What kind of monstrous freak is that? He desperately demanded. The voice on the line remained chillingly indifferent. He is merely a failure of the Yamure bloodline, a complete nobody. Just worthless trash that should have been eliminated with absolute ease. Unaga violently gritted his teeth, constantly reminding himself that he had absolutely nothing to fear. The ruthless Reuters had already been deployed straight from Ryuta. If this shadow operation succeeded, Unaga would secure a highly coveted recommendation to Lord Ima, and only through that absolute power would he finally qualify as the third-grade police chief of the Bowen district. Unaga audibly gulped. He desperately warned the man on the line, Hashimoto, to never forget their binding pact. Back inside the cold detention cell, Makuto sat with absolute terrifying composure before the broken Zenji. You are still refusing to speak, Makuto noted. After suffering all of that, I must commend your foolish courage. Zenji let out a pathetic, blood-choked laugh. He openly confessed it. He had completely misjudged Makuto's terrifying power. A monstrous existence like him was far beyond the realm of mere mortals. That specific phrasing instantly seized Makuto's sharp attention. Ordinary people, Zenji weakly clarified. Years ago, in the depths of Ryuta, he crossed paths with an ancient elder. With just a single, effortless motion, the man manipulated his inner chi, violently cleaving a massive tree in two. This mysterious monk then gifted him a vial of so-called divine water. Desperate for power, Zenji consumed it in heavily diluted drops over the span of several grueling years. Slowly, his mortal vessel underwent a profound evolution, mutating into something far beyond human. Makuto's eyes narrowed in instant realization. This so-called divine water was actually precious spirit liquid. Riki. If the legendary Ryuta truly hid a secret spirit spring, Makuto had to claim its immense power for himself. Such mythical springs only ever manifested in domains completely overflowing with dense spiritual aura, over countless years. That atmospheric energy would physically condense into liquid, eventually birthing a sacred spring, back on the legendary Lua continent. Even a single solitary drop of such spiritual essence was absolutely priceless. Makuto then posed the ultimate question. If you have truly ascended beyond mere mortals, why submit like a dog? Zenji's battered face instantly darkened. He solemnly explained, his beloved child was suffering from ALS. The crushing medical debts were utterly astronomical. And tragically, the divine water could not eradicate the horrific disease. It merely sustained his child's fading life force. He desperately needed vast wealth and endless time to discover a true miracle cure. Makuto completely understood the tragic burden. ALS could be conquered. I might actually be able to save your dying child, Makuto declared. Zenji completely froze in stunned disbelief, utterly convinced his damaged ears were deceiving him. Makuto calmly explained. Highly concentrated spirit liquid was lethal to fragile mortals. It would violently destroy the body if recklessly consumed. But when guided by a true master's technique, its miraculous healing properties could be perfectly refined and drastically amplified. Makuto then revealed a glowing spiritual talisman. Zenji watched in sheer awe as Makuto ignited its ancient power. The horrific wounds covering his battered body instantly began to mend. His agonizing pain completely evaporated, and his erratic breathing perfectly stabilized. Zenji's eyes widened in sheer shock. Makuto stared down at him with an unwavering gaze. You have exactly two paths. Reveal the puppet master, and I save your child's life. Or you will perish right here. Zenji smiled a faint, defeated smile. Just as he suspected, Makuto was a true monster among men. He finally surrendered the ultimate name, Hashimoto Kos, though the criminal underworld simply knew him as Kos. Far away in a luxurious hideout, a blond man abruptly ended his call and let out an arrogant, dismissive scoff. Unaga is actually trembling over a worthless Yamare nobody. This sinister figure was Hashimoto Kos, the ruthless master of the Kosan Club. He turned slowly toward his captive guest. Would she prefer fresh meat or a cold drink? The woman sat bound to a heavy steel chair. Her body was brutally battered, her spirit completely broken. Silent tears streamed down her face. Kos let out a heavy sigh. He scolded her like a disobedient child. Manners were important, after all. He ripped the tape from her lips, gripped her jaw tightly, and whispered with absolute madness, "Which tooth shall we extract first today?" Moments later, he turned away without a shred of pity. A loyal butler stepped into the room. He reported an urgent message. From Lord Aima. The master was inquiring about the Yamare situation. Kos simply waved his hand in dismissal. The Reuters had already been dispatched. Besides, he planned to drop by the precinct very soon. In his eyes, Makuto Yamare was nothing but a dead man walking. Meanwhile, deep within the holding cells, Zenji passed something carefully to Makuto. It was an ancient, cross-shaped pendant. Inside rested a highly concentrated spirit liquid. A single drop could force silver heartgrass into immediate bloom. By refining those mystical seeds into a joy pill, Makuto would finally be able to break through to the second stage of chi refining. Makuto grasped the pendant tightly. It was the exact catalyst he needed. But Zenji offered a grim warning. From this moment on, Kos would hunt him without mercy. And anyone marked by Kos was doomed to a horrific fate. Yet Makuto did not flinch. As long as you forget about our deal, he declared smoothly, you will be completely fine. As for Kos, I will personally welcome him at Nihi University. Somewhere else, a sleek yellow sports car braked heavily. Shizuru stepped onto the pavement and lowered her shades. If she had not seen the photographic proof with her own eyes, she never would have believed such an impossible truth. That humble boy selling mystical talismans on the streets was actually the banished heir of the Yamore bloodline. What shocked her even more was that he was a junior at her very own campus. She shook her head in sheer disbelief. Fate works in mysterious ways. She headed straight for the president's office, intending to ask Uncle Jin about Makuto's exact class. But inside that prestigious room, a fierce argument was already echoing. Mochiasaki slammed both palms against the mahogany desk. She furiously accused a certain man of underworld Yakuza ties. Her blazing anger was directed right at her uncle, Mochiyama Jin, the esteemed president of Nihi University. Jin released a weary breath. True or not, he refused to step into that battlefield. One wrong move would drag the entire academy into ruin. Saki was absolutely livid. How could they just abandon Makuto to the hands of utterly corrupt police officers? The university was doing absolutely nothing to protect its own. She refused to be a silent bystander. Instructor Kumono Hina gently stepped in to ease the tension. She promised Saki that Makuto would return safely in no time. Suddenly, the heavy office doors swung wide. Saki froze in her tracks. It was her senior. Shizuru stepped into the room, her eyes sweeping the tension. Are you all discussing Makuto Yamore? Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Mr. Kaya had completely reached his breaking point. He pointed a furious finger straight at Unaga Riso. They had hunted the criminal known as Scar for countless years, and now that the beast was finally caged, Unaga was just going to let him walk free? This is a blatant abuse of power, Kaya stated with ice in his voice. Unaga merely smirked, challenging him to produce hard evidence. Without proof, accusing a commanding officer was a fatal career move, but Kaya refused to back down an inch. He stared him down fearlessly. He knew exactly what kind of dark scheme Unaga was brewing. Unaga's eyes flared with sudden rage. He dared his subordinate to say those words again. Just as the standoff reached its peak, the interrogation room doors blasted open. Saki and Shizuru marched inside. Saki immediately demanded Makuto's unconditional release. Unaga spun around, glaring daggers at the terrified guards holding the door. He roared, demanding to know how civilians had breached a secure area. His cold gaze then swept over Shizuru, and he let out a mocking scoff. That Yamore brat had 0 powerful backers, and even if he did, they meant nothing here. With a chilling calm, he declared that Makuto was facing serious charges of robbery and brutal assault. Letting him go was absolutely out of the question. Upon hearing this, Kaya furiously snapped back. She demanded to know when Makuto had ever committed such crimes. Unaga simply brushed the question aside. Internal affairs were far beyond a mere subordinate's rank. Saki immediately called out the glaring hypocrisy. If Makuto was locked away, then where were the actual criminals? Freeing the guilty while caging an innocent student was blatant corruption. Unaga's expression grew dangerously cold. He spat back that he owed them 0 explanations, warning that if she refused to leave, she would be locked up for obstructing justice. Shizuru remained perfectly still, gently setting her phone on the desk, and took a seat on the sofa with a chilling smile. Go right ahead, she challenged. Just try it. Unaga finally snapped. He ordered his men to arrest everyone in the room and gag them. The officers lunged forward. Unaga loudly branded them all as accomplices. To Makuto Yaimori, immediately suspending Kaya for protecting criminals. This is a severe abuse of power, Kaya warned sharply. Shizuru did not even blink. She simply asked one piercing question. Do you truly believe fake charges can silence everyone? Unaga burst into arrogant laughter. Insulting a high-ranking official would only guarantee a much heavier sentence. Shizuru calmly noted that invisible hands had clearly been pulling strings for his benefit. If dirty money could erase problems, then Makuto's situation could easily be erased too. Unaga gave a sinister smirk. He declared that ultimate power brought ultimate privilege, and this was simply Makuto's tragic fate. Then he casually whispered that an official report could easily be forged, claiming Kaya resisted arrest, leaving everyone dead in the crossfire. A heavy silence choked the room. Suddenly, Shizuru broke the tension. Director Oji, did you catch all of that? A deep, steady voice echoed back. Loud and clear, young lady. Every head snapped toward the sound. The director had been listening to their entire twisted conversation. All the blood completely drained from Unaga's face. Shizuru politely confirmed if he had caught every single word. The director firmly agreed. For collaborating with the criminal underworld, his voice boomed with absolute authority. For abusing authority and threatening a council member's bloodline, Unaga Risu is stripped of his rank. Take him to the interrogation room immediately. Unaga's knees crashed to the floor. He barely managed to choke out. Just who are you? Shizuru answered calmly. I belong to the Shuga family. Pure terror consumed Unaga's soul. That Yaimori boy was actually protected by the legendary Shuga bloodline. Deep within the cold detention block, Makuto carefully inspected his spirit liquid. It was barely a single drop, only enough for one activation. Suddenly, his aura flared as he sensed an approach. The sharp click of heels echoed down the quiet hallway. Heavy iron doors swung open. Makuto raised his head. Shizuru greeted him with a warm smile. Standing right beside her was Mochiasaki. Apologies for the delay, Shizuru said softly. Meanwhile, returning to the arrogant blonde villain, Koss was consumed by pure rage. He violently shattered a glass against the floor, screaming that he was surrounded by incompetent trash. One of his men was barely clinging to life. Another was being dragged straight to a prison cell. In his twisted eyes, they were completely worthless garbage. If this critical mission for the Ima family failed, Koss knew his own life would be forfeit. His bodyguard swallowed hard, nervously asking for their next move. A murderous shadow fell over Koss's face. He would deploy his absolute strongest warrior. This time, Merely killing Makuto was not the priority. To prove his absolute loyalty to the Ima family, he would crush that miserable trash with his own two hands. Later, back at Makuto's apartment, the television hummed softly in the dark room. Makuto focused entirely on the precious materials spread before him. He had secured every rare ingredient he required, draining his bank account down to the last coin. Yet, the sacrifice was absolutely worth it. He closed his eyes and began refining the gathering chi pill. The ancient technique was flawless. Compress the overwhelmingly dense spiritual energy, purify the core, stabilize the chaotic flow. The final pill lacked perfection, but in this mortal realm, it held terrifying power. Makuto swallowed the elixir. Instantly, an explosive surge of raw energy erupted through his veins. His breath steadied. His meridians expanded. Chi refining, stage 2. He vanished into thin air. A faint smile crossed his lips. It had been ages since he moved with such freedom. He activated cloud steps. Moving at this incredible speed, even bullets could not touch him. But his spirit liquid was completely drained. To advance any further, he desperately needed more spirit-infused items or liquid. Faki mentioned a spirit spring located in Ryuta. However, traveling there openly was far too dangerous. So, Makuto chose to rely on a local connection Faki had introduced. But funds were an issue. Entry alone cost 2 million yen. His current pockets were entirely too light. Then, a television commercial caught his eye. A beauty advertisement. The Sugao beauty injection, promising restored youth with a single needle. It was a massive sensation, especially now, selling at its absolute lowest price. Makuto understood instantly. The women of this world obsessed over their youth. This sparked a brilliant idea. 5 hours earlier, Makuto sat across from Shizuru at dinner. The reality was still hard to grasp. She was the daughter of Councilman Shuga. That explained how she could contact the police chief directly. She admitted she needed a favor. Makuto raised an eyebrow. What kind of favor? She asked if he knew the Sugo building, Nihi City's largest cosmetics empire. Then she casually revealed she owned the entire company. Tomorrow night, she was hosting a grand party there to celebrate her mother's recovery. And she wanted Makuto to attend. The night of the banquet arrived. On the top floor of the Sugo building, the venue hummed with high society chatter. Makuto watched from the shadows. At his current stage, true spirit pills were out of reach. But ordinary elixirs, those were entirely possible to craft. Like the Juian pill, a common, low-grade elixir from the Lua continent, widely used by female cultivators. But in this world, selling just 3 or 4 pills could easily net him 2 million yen. The perfect opportunity stood right before him. It was time to make his move. Meanwhile, Shizuru's aunt, Ino, Hoshisu, and her uncle, Shiro Hoshisu, approached her. They sneered that a woman in her 30s was no longer young. It was high time she considered marriage. They mocked her endlessly, warning she might end up exactly like Masami Hoshisu, an unmarried older woman. Shiro sneered, claiming Masami was paying the price for her selfish youth, now senile and entirely useless to the family. Masami quietly lowered her head. She did not dare to argue back. Yoko snapped, demanding he stop. Shizuru fiercely reminded him that Masami had raised them all after their mother passed away. Shiro coldly dismissed the sentiment, claiming he was only speaking for the family's benefit. Now that Yoko had finally awakened, Shizuru needed to accept a marriage proposal. Suddenly, Yoko coughed weakly. Shizuru rushed to her mother's side. Shiro continued his relentless assault. He stated that an unmarried woman, past her prime, was nothing but defective merchandise. He then suggested the U family as a proper match. Masami finally found her voice. She stated she had her own thoughts on the matter. Shiro scoffed, instantly accusing her of selfishness. Then he added, "No cosmetic product could ever truly restore youth." That was when a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "I can." Dead silence fell over the room. Every eye turned. Makuto stepped forward from the shadows. "There is a limit to human arrogance," he stated evenly. "Calling a respected woman defective completely crosses that line." Shiro snapped in absolute fury. He demanded to know the intruder's identity and called for security. Shizuru immediately intervened. "This is Makuto Yaimore, the man who saved my mother's life." Yoko bowed her head in deep respect. She sincerely thanked him for selling them the life-saving talisman. Makuto responded with absolute politeness. No thanks were necessary, but Shiro merely scoffed. He claimed a pathetic scammer had fooled them, that Yoko had recovered solely through modern medicine, not through some highly suspicious charms. Makuto simply nodded with an eerie calm. Allow me to properly introduce myself. I am a researcher specializing in time and value, and a trusted business partner of President Shuga. Shizuru froze in absolute shock. She had no idea. A guest laughed, claiming he did not belong here, stating they were simply discussing whether true youth could ever be restored. A faint, mysterious smile crossed Makuto's face. In that case, he announced, I can give you an answer. He turned toward Masami and extended his hand. Would you help me with a simple demonstration? Masami hesitated, trembling with nerves. Slowly, Makuto opened a small, elegant box. Inside rested a single pill. This, he declared with absolute calm, is a Jian pill. Shiryu instantly branded Makuto a liar. He even suggested the item was lethally poisoned. Masami nervously wondered if it was truly safe to consume. Shizuru firmly vouched for Makuto's undeniable trustworthiness. She boldly offered to drink it herself. Yoko quickly stepped forward to do the exact same. After all, he was her ultimate savior. Her trust in him was absolute. Yet one man loudly argued the facts. A true rejuvenation medicine simply could not exist. Makuto leaned in, whispering into Masami's ear. He tempted her with a single powerful thought, the miraculous chance to reclaim the radiant feelings of her youth. Bitter memories instantly flooded her mind. The cruel times they called her an old hag, mocking her aged face. That dark memory was the final push. Completely convinced, she resolved to take the gamble. She took the pill and swallowed it down. The entire room watched in absolute horrified shock. At first, absolutely nothing seemed to change. The crowd scoffed, assuming it was a pathetic lie. Whispers of deadly poison filled the room. Shiryu smirked, entirely smug, believing he had exposed the utter nonsense. He looked down on Makuto with utter disdain, mocking his status as a mere researcher. But then, a miraculous transformation began. Masami's face, hair, and entire body rapidly changed. A trembling man held up a mirror for her. She stared deeply at her own stunning reflection. She looked exactly as she had in her flawless youth. The entire crowd was frozen in sheer disbelief. A desperate, middle-aged woman rushed toward Makuto. She begged to know the price, frantic to claim one. He calmly replied, "It is 400,000 yen per pill." But he only brought 10 with him. Pure chaos erupted as the guests frantically began bidding. They had to get their hands on one. Shiryu scowled. He was deeply displeased by this overwhelming fuss. All over a single Zuyan pill. Intense greed ignited among the businessmen on the sidelines. They furiously whispered that the alchemy technique itself held the true, unimaginable value. If they could only secure those exclusive distribution rights, they would instantly dominate the very top of the industry. Ino anxiously argued against the reckless idea. Such a massive gamble would bankrupt their entire company. But Shiryu viciously ordered her to shut up. He plotted to sweet-talk the naive kid and buy precious time, just until they successfully married off Shizuru to the powerful U family. Then, they could finally collect the massive investment. Once that happened, they would easily acquire as many of those miraculous pills as they desired. Suddenly, a heavy-set man approached Makuto with a greedy glint in his eye. He boldly declared that the Kokoen Group wanted to buy the distribution rights for 4 million yen. Overhearing this, another man swiftly countered. The Rinko Group proudly offered a staggering 20 million. Shiryu immediately stepped in, demanding everyone's attention. He firmly stated that Makuto was Shizuru's personal guest. Therefore, it would be highly inappropriate to openly discuss such serious business deals here. Instead, he smoothly invited Makuto for a private chat. In private, he shamelessly declared his company would offer 30 million, proposing a 30-70 profit split. Makuto calmly asked if he would receive 70%, leaving 30 for Shiryu. Shiryu scoffed and immediately replied, "No, it was entirely the other way around." He arrogantly boasted about the Hoshisu family's supreme connections, a ridiculous claim that Shizuru instantly questioned. What kind of ties does this family even have? Shiryu scoffed in total disbelief. She shared their blood, yet she completely rejected that bond. She mercilessly exposed his past. He had squandered 160 million yen, using their grandmother's legacy as mere collateral. Family was the last thing on his mind back then. Panic flashed across his face. He ordered her to shut her mouth, but she fired back, threatening to read the family's exact withdrawal records and the bank's harsh demand notices out loud. Shock hit Yoko hard. He had gambled their mother's company. All the color drained from Shiru's face. He stammered, demanding to know how they found out. Had they investigated him? Shizuru saw right through his lies. They were only there to squeeze money from her mother. It was a parasitic scheme to bleed her dry, the exact same trap he set for their grandmother. She refused to hand over a single cent. His greedy scheme was painfully obvious. He wanted massive profits without risking any capital because he lacked the 30 million yen required. Simply put, he was plotting to scam Makuto. He desperately denied the accusations, begging Yoko to silence her daughter. But Yoko's eyes held only bitter disappointment. She had entrusted him with their mother's legacy, solely because he promised to reform. Shiru pleaded with his sister, desperately clinging to the shield she always provided. He used his bloodline as a weapon, claiming she must save the last remaining man of the Hoshisu family. But Masami stepped in, declaring she could forgive his past arrogance. However, embezzling their mother's sacred inheritance crossed the absolute line. Therefore, her mercy had run dry. He was entirely on his own. Disbelief shattered his world as his final lifeline snapped. Shizuru offered a brutal ultimatum. He could either face the crushing wrath of the law and rot away in eternal debt, or he could surrender the company to her for a single yen. If some fool actually wanted that decaying business, she would gladly step aside. Shiru stood paralyzed in sheer disbelief. Whispers filled the room. The crowd knew this was poetic justice. Then, Shizuru turned her attention to Makuto. The room was full of elite investors, and she offered to open those doors for him. For the distribution rights of his pills, 40 million yen was a fair bargain, plus he would retain 80% of the profits. But this world was full of bloodthirsty sharks. He needed to tread carefully. Yet, she looked at him with absolute trust, knowing his business instincts were flawless. The lavish night ended, and they headed toward Makuto's home. Shizuru praised his quiet sanctuary. He humbly brushed it off as a simple rental. He expressed his gratitude for the smooth ride. In response, she softly told him that friends look out for each other. That single word caught Makuto completely off guard. A warm smile graced her lips. They were true friends now. As she left, he stood lost in the moment. Perhaps his fate was finally taking a brighter turn. He approached his front door and pushed it open. Pitch blackness greeted him, but as the pale moonlight crept inside, a gruesome nightmare was revealed. His loyal dog lay motionless, drowning in a pool of crimson blood. A fatal blade had pierced its chest. Makuto's eyes ignited with blazing wrath, his face twisting into a mask of pure terror. Confusion and madness clashed within his mind. Hidden in the shadows, a spy dialed Koss immediately. The target had returned. Furthermore, he assumed the woman beside him was his lover. Koss issued a ruthless command to abduct her at once. They believed that breaking Makuto's spirit would perfectly satisfy Lord Aima's dark desires. Concurrently, Makuto stepped deeper into his home. He saw the brutal state of his loyal companion. The culprits hoped he would enjoy their twisted little present. He rushed to the dog's side to check its fading pulse. A faint breath remained. A healing talisman could still pull it back from the brink. But lurking in the shadows above, an assassin waited to strike. Seizing the moment, the killer dropped down with a lethal blade. The strike nearly pierced Makuto's shoulder, but his body vanished into thin air. In a split second, he launched a devastating counterattack. A crushing kick struck the assassin's face, all while Makuto safely cradled his injured dog. The ambushers hiding behind. The furniture stepped out, completely stunned by his impossible speed. Gently setting the dog down, he ordered it to stay hidden. The assassin he just struck lay bleeding heavily from a fractured skull. Makuto realized this was a coordinated hit. His eyes locked onto the remaining thugs as a terrifying purple aura flared around him. With a voice cold as ice, he dared them to step up one by one. The gang charged forward, intending to beat him to a bloody pulp without taking his life. Makuto smoothly dodged a vicious knife thrust. Raising his hand, dark purple energy swirled tightly around his fist. He gripped the attacker's face and ruthlessly slammed him into the ground. The bone-shattering impact forced the blade to fly from the thug's helpless grip. The rest of the gang froze. Pure terror began to creep across their pale faces. That was only the first victim. Another foolish thug lunged forward, screaming at him to drop the arrogance. Makuto ducked beneath the wild slash. With a brutal twist, he snapped the man's arm, drawing out a deafening shriek of agony. His hand clamped around the thug's throat like an iron vise, releasing him only when he went completely limp. The second target had fallen. Desperate, the remaining attackers changed their tactics, aiming their guns directly at his limbs. Gunfire erupted through the room, but Makuto moved like a phantom, weaving through the flying bullets as he closed the distance. He swore to crush every single one of them until someone finally talked. Meanwhile, miles away, Koss carefully laid out his gruesome torture tools. Picking up a gleaming scalpel, he sneered at his bound hostage, admitting he initially thought she was just a random brat. He never expected to capture the very woman every powerful man in Kongai City dreamed of possessing. He finally realized her true identity. She was Shizuru Suga, the precious daughter of Councilman Kenji Suga. Heavy iron chains bound her limbs to the cold metal table, her desperate cries silenced by a thick layer of tape. Suddenly, his phone rang. He eagerly asked if the assassination squad had finished the job, but the voice on the other end sent a chill down his spine. It was Makuto. He coldly informed Koss that his henchman would never wake up again, mocking his pathetic attempt at a surprise attack. Backed into a corner, Koss revealed his ultimate trump card. He held the councilman's daughter. Hearing this, absolute murder flashed within Makuto's eyes. He made a chilling promise to hunt him down, ordering him to release her immediately. He strictly warned the sadist against dragging innocent blood into their war. Koss laughed and called him a naive brat. He started a ticking clock. 40 minutes. After that, he would broadcast her brutal execution to the entire city of Kongai, but he kept the location a complete secret. It was a twisted game, forcing Makuto to find them before time ran out. The line went dead. Makuto's grip crushed the phone until the screen shattered into pieces. He instantly vanished into the night to track Koss down. Back at the hideout, Koss prepared to record a sickening teaser video. He violently ripped the tape from Shizuru's mouth. Just then, a massive crash echoed from right outside the warehouse doors. Throwing the door open, he demanded to know what was going on. His anxious guards quickly reported that the building's emergency fire suppression system had suddenly been triggered. Koss exploded in furious anger. He had explicitly ordered them to disable the alarms to keep the police away. Gritting his teeth, he stormed off to inspect the system himself, ordering his men to guard the hostage with their lives. Inside the dark room, a terrified Shizuru teetered on the edge of consciousness, while the armed guards outside. Panic erupted as an intruder struck. One guard was hurled violently against the heavy door, smashing it wide open. Through her trembling breaths, she whispered a single name: Makuto. Just 1 hour prior, Zenji sped through the darkness on his motorcycle. He had traveled all the way to the district, tasked with delivering a crucial letter of introduction to Ryuta in the dead of night. Yet, Makuto was completely unreachable. Zenji double-checked the mysterious address, 432 Emi Street, and finally located Makuto's residence. But suddenly, muffled voices caught his attention. Someone was reporting to Koss, confirming that Makuto had finally returned home. Staying in the shadows, he eavesdropped, and heard the informant boasting to Koss that their hired assassin would beat him to death. Worse still, they had captured the woman and were dragging her along. Zenji quickly pieced it together. When the informant mentioned Lord Hashimoto, he was definitely referring to Koss, the mastermind who sent assassins to Makuto's home and kidnapped an innocent woman. As the enemy vehicle sped away, he shadowed them, determined to send Makuto the exact coordinates. Tailing the car through the night, he arrived at a massive mansion and immediately dialed Makuto. This time the call connected. Letting out a sigh of relief, he rapidly explained the dire situation. He revealed that Koss had kidnapped his girlfriend and that he had tracked the henchman straight to a sprawling estate. He chillingly asked if the address was 32 Hirami Street. Zeng froze in absolute shock, demanding to know how he already had that information. Unbeknownst to them, our boy had repeatedly tortured and healed. An elite assassin until the broken man spilled every single secret. He then asked Zenji for a crucial favor. He needed to rescue his friend from the estate, while he personally dragged Koss down to the depths of hell. Moments later, a piercing security alarm echoed through the enemy warehouse. Koss furiously scolded his men, fearing the noise would draw the police. He went to investigate, leaving 2 guards behind. The second Koss vanished. The remaining guards began to grumble, complaining about their pathetic wages. They even whined about being forbidden from touching the captive girl inside. Suddenly, a chilling presence filled the air. One guard tensed up, demanding to know who was hiding in the shadows. Zenge stepped calmly into the light. The 2 thugs flinched in absolute shock. He coldly told them to embrace the darkness for a moment. With a devastating strike, he sent the guard crashing straight into the heavy door. As Zenj breached the room, a terrified Shizuru cried out Makuto's name. Seeing her battered state, he smirked, noting that Makuto definitely owed him for this. He swiftly hoisted her onto his shoulder to make a rapid escape. They had to vanish before the enemy realized the base was compromised. He knew his escape route led straight to the car parked in the rear garden. Since the guards were distracted by the alarm, the path should have been completely clear. But suddenly, a deafening gunshot rang out. A bullet tore right through his right thigh, sending him collapsing to the ground just inches from freedom. Stepping from the shadows, Koss smugly praised his own flawless aim. His loyal grunts showered him with sickening praise. Gritting his teeth, Zenj wondered how they returned so fast. Koss sneered, claiming he was absolutely amazed that Zenj still had the nerve to show his face. He mockingly welcomed him back after so long. Koss was absolutely thrilled, assuming he had come just to beg for punishment. A twisted smile formed on his face, but Zenga boldly spat back that he was dead wrong, and that Koss could only boast after actually defeating him. At that exact same moment, outside the gates, the perimeter guards spotted a lone figure. They shouted into the darkness, demanding an identity. Our boy stepped forward in absolute silence. A terrifying red aura surged around him as a crushing killing intent suffocated the night air. Makuto marched forward relentlessly, ignoring the guard who aggressively grabbed his shoulder, trying to stop his advance and demanding his attention. Without uttering a single word, he unleashed a devastating punch that shattered the man's nose. The sheer force sent the thug flying backward into the steel gates. Pure panic gripped the remaining guards as they drew their weapons. Roaring in desperation, they charged at him all at once, but he moved in a blinding blur. Crimson energy flashed violently as he struck, sending another man rocketing through the air, while another crashed into the earth. The strikes rained down so fast they could not even react. He breached their defenses completely unscathed. Then, his voice echoed out, announcing his arrival to Koss. Meanwhile, deep inside the luxurious mansion, Zenj was battered and bleeding. He was hopelessly outnumbered. Bitter regret filled his heart for ever accepting Makuto's request. Crushing shame washed over him, unable to save even a single woman. Koss sneered, warning that upon his final breath, his corpse would be hacked to pieces. Suddenly, the heavy front doors blew apart in a violent explosion. Koss demanded to know who dared interrupt. As the dust settled, Makuto stood framed in the doorway, a deadly purple aura flickering around his body. With ice in his voice, he answered that he was the Reaper sent to drag him to hell. Coughing blood, Zeng smirked, claiming he took his sweet time. Makuto tossed him a healing talisman, instructing him to use it exactly the same way as before. Pure panic struck Koss as he ordered his men to kill the intruder. Gunfire erupted across the hall, but Makuto lunged forward in a blinding blur. His eyes glowed fiercely as his aura surged outward. Mortal bullets were completely useless against a second-stage cultivator who had mastered the cloud shadow step. A devastating kick shattered a guard's face. Witnessing this impossible speed, absolute terror gripped Koss. While Makuto ruthlessly dismantled the remaining guards, Koss scrambled to flee. He stealthily cracked open the back exit. Slipping through the doorway, he stomped furiously down the hall. He cursed the bad intel. He was told this target was nothing but pathetic trash. Yet those flawless movements clearly belonged to an elite master from a prestigious family. Reaching the vault, he screamed at his men to open the door. He punched in the passcode, but it failed. Horror washed over his face as pure panic set in. Suddenly, his own guards were sent flying right to his feet. Even as his body violently trembled from sheer terror, he warned Makuto to step back, threatening that he could never handle the monster backing this operation. And then he confessed that the one hunting him was Lord Ima. He was the true mastermind pulling the strings. Makuto coldly asked who that was. Koss warned him to stop playing dumb, or he would suffer unimaginable agony. He frantically explained it was Joe Ima, the powerful scion of the Ima family. The towering Ima clan was currently arranging a massive political marriage with the Amaya family. The rumor that Makuto had laid his hands on the Amaya family's daughter had reached them, so they wanted him erased. It was her doing again. The original owner of this body held zero memories of ever meeting that woman, so he knew this rumor was a vicious conspiracy to frame him. But who on earth would orchestrate such a deadly trap? Koz gloated that only the untouchable Ima family possessed the power to pull this off. Therefore, it was heavily in Makuto's best interest to spare his life right now. He bragged that the Ima family commanded countless experts, and Joe Ima himself possessed terrifying strength. This revelation confirmed Makuto's suspicion. Joe was a cultivator. Koss began bargaining for his life, promising his full assistance so Makuto could see his true worth. Makuto coldly repeated the word worth, leading Koss to foolishly believe they had a deal. So, the sudden, crushing punch caught him completely off guard. Makuto drove his fist mercilessly down into Koss, the devastating impact launching him across the room. Koss violently crashed against the hard floor, the brutal shockwave echoing through the hall as a woman screamed in terror. Hidden in the shadows, several battered women were chained to the cold wall in merely their underwear. Makuto was entirely horrified by the gruesome sight. The terrified captives flinched in fear as he stood there in deadly silence. Blazing fury ignited within him. He coldly told Koss that these victims could judge his worth far better than he ever could. With a flash of steel, his dagger sliced right through their heavy iron chains. He tossed the blade onto the floor, telling the ladies they were free to do absolutely whatever they wanted to, Koss. Begging for his miserable life, Koss desperately offered him endless money, valuables, and everything he owned. But those women sought only one thing. Sending him straight to hell was the only revenge they needed. Moments later, Makuto rushed to Shazuru. He drew a talisman, using its ancient power to heal her wounds. He urged Zenge to flee immediately. The authorities had been called, and they were closing in fast. Zenge hesitated, asking if he was absolutely certain. Makuto assured him that he would leave right after handing her over to the police. Having finally secured the crucial intel, Zenge questioned his next move. Makuto revealed his intention to investigate Ima, but he paused his thoughts. He knew all too well that the enemy heavily outnumbered him. Back home, Makuto fiercely trained his physical body. Meanwhile, his loyal dog rested quietly on the sofa. He had eliminated Koss, but the partner remained hidden in the shadows. He needed to track him down and crush him without mercy. Suddenly, the doorbell pierced the silence. The late hour even startled his dog. Who could possibly be visiting in the dead of night? Opening the door, a sharp-suited man greeted him. The stranger handed over a package from President Suga. The message was clear. She would depart the moment he was ready. The cryptic message left him completely confused. He shut the door and immediately dialed her number. He confirmed receiving the mysterious invitation, yet he could not grasp why she sent formal attire. Hearing this, she expressed her relief that the delivery arrived. She urged him to check the contents. A grand banquet was being hosted by the powerful Hoshisu family. He questioned if his presence was truly necessary. She made it clear that he must attend. To successfully market the Zhu Yan pills, infiltrating the Hoshisu family's inner circle was vital. After all, they controlled Kungai City's most dominant pharmaceutical empire. Then, she dropped a heavy revelation. His former fiancée would also be there. The sudden news struck him like lightning. He tried to demand a name, but she quickly cut him off. It was none other than the Amaya family's daughter, Yuki Amaya. Soon, they stepped into the grand venue. Shizuru pointed out the elite guests mingling around them, including Mr. Pierce, the general agent for the Ace Group, and Mr. Taro Akai, the board chairman of the Co Group. Both were absolute titans, ruling the business underworld of Kongai City. Makuto silently wondered if these giants were also desperate for the Hoshisu family's favor. Shizuru sighed. Despite Makuto being born into a noble bloodline, he remained entirely blind to their overwhelming influence. Simply being a relative of the Amaya family made every elite desperate for a connection. This was especially true for the Amaya family's daughter, whose arrival was imminent. The two stood near the entrance as the Hoshisu family head finally appeared. Beside her walked the imposing Lady Yuki Amaya. At that moment, Makuto sensed a profound spiritual energy radiating from her. Could this truly be the former fiancée of his body's original owner? He instantly raised his guard. Nana Hoshisu, the reigning head of the Hoshisu family, offered a wave as she glided past, while Yuki Amaya, the proud daughter of the Amaya family, cast a cold gaze downward. Makuto's mind raced. Was she a fellow cultivator? He grew curious if this unfamiliar world possessed its own unique methods of cultivation. Moreover, she made zero effort to conceal her spiritual aura. Her blatant display proved an absolute unwavering confidence. Since he expected her to know Ima, he silently planned to interrogate her later. Breaking the tension, Shizuru cheerfully greeted her Aunt Nana. Nana warmly acknowledged the greeting, immediately asking about her mother's condition. Having heard of her recent awakening, Nana praised the heavens for watching over her sister. Shizuru bowed in gratitude, explaining that her mother was steadily regaining her strength. She then presented a batch of Su-Yen pills on her mother's behalf. These were the most advanced medicinal pills their company handled. She handed the gift over and he wished her eternal beauty. Nana beamed at the sight of the legendary Shuen pills. The man beside her gasped in awe. The entire room buzzed with sudden intrigue, especially since these exact pills had been fetching an astronomical price, even though they had not officially hit the market yet. Yuki stared intensely. Nana carefully inspected the treasure. She praised its flawless quality, declaring that it could easily be considered the absolute pinnacle of spirit pills. She assumed the Grandmaster who forged such a treasure possessed godlike skill. Having met the supreme masters of the alchemy world, she burned with curiosity. It did not even bear an official alchemical seal. Shizuru smiled, revealing the creator was her close friend and business partner. Makuto stepped forward and introduced himself. Nana and Yuki froze in sheer disbelief. Nana simply could not believe her eyes. She recalled holding him as a mere child, and now he stood tall. She was utterly stunned that he could forge the legendary Xuan pills. She scoffed, declaring that the Yaimore family were utterly blind to true talent. Yuki quickly interrupted, stating that such a rare skill held zero value within a noble household. In their brutal world, a martial artist's cultivation level reigns absolute above all else. Otherwise, the Amaya family would have welcomed him as an esteemed elder years ago. This confirmed Makuto's dark suspicion. The noble families had indeed grasped the secrets of cultivation, though their methods were crude and paled compared to the divine techniques of the Lua continent. Yuki concluded that with Makuto's lowly status, possessing such incredible skill meant absolutely nothing. Nana nodded in agreement, but to forge a pill of this caliber, she desperately wanted to know the identity of his master. This question made him pause. A fleeting image of his majestic master crossed his mind, yet he calmly replied that alchemy was merely a hobby. He claimed he had no master at all. He was about to speak again when a loud voice abruptly shattered the moment. A man, with silver hair and sharp glasses, wished his Aunt Nana a joyous birthday. He strode confidently toward them. The crowd murmured. A guest leaned in and whispered, asking for the newcomer's identity. She learned he was the proud scion of the formidable Aima family. A server recognized him from a lavish banquet in Kyoto the previous year. Nana warmly acknowledged his grand entrance. She called out to Joe. Makuto's eyes narrowed sharply as the name echoed in his mind. Joe smirked, joking that being too polite would only earn him Yuki's fiery wrath. His gaze then locked onto the stunning woman standing nearby. He asked for her name. Nana. Introduced Shizuru Suga of the illustrious Suga family. A highly amused smile crept onto his face. He introduced himself as Joe Aima and smoothly extended his hand. Makuto firmly intercepted, gripping Joe's hand tight while mentioning the dark rumors surrounding him. Joe blinked, asking who this stranger was. Makuto scoffed internally. Was this arrogant scion playing dumb? He decided to test this little charade. According to Koss, Joe Aima was supposed to be a hidden cultivator. Makuto stated his name while subtly radiating his spiritual aura. Normal cultivators suppress their spiritual energy fluctuations to conceal their true, terrifying strength, unless forced into special circumstances or utterly unable to store spiritual energy. Those inner waves were never carelessly released. Yet, it was physically impossible to hide the spiritual energy coursing through one's hidden meridians. Seizing the moment, Makuto channeled his own dominant energy straight into Joe's meridians. His aura surged violently, but to his absolute shock, he sensed zero spiritual energy flowing within the man. The realization hit him like lightning. Joe might not be a cultivator at all. Joe yanked his hand away, stating it was nice to meet him. He then brushed past him to greet Yuki. Makuto's eyes darkened with growing suspicion. Even throughout their conversation, he could not sense a single spiritual fluctuation. He began to suspect that this man was not a cultivator at all. He did not even leak a fraction of bloodlust upon hearing Makuto's name. Eventually, the banquet commenced. The guests dined and conversed freely. Soon, the butler announced that a grand ball would follow the feast, requesting everyone to gather in the main hall. The music swelled, and the floor filled with dancers. Meanwhile, Makuto slipped away to the restroom, contemplating if he was walking into a trap. If Joe was truly powerless, what was his actual scheme? Shazuru watched him wander through the crowd. Suddenly, a gentleman approached, requesting a dance. She rejected him with polite indifference. A friend quickly pulled the rejected man aside, whispering that he was an absolute fool for asking. There was zero chance the proud daughter of the Shuga family would ever dance with a nobody. She had turned away every single suitor, even the prestigious young master of the Katagiri family. He noted that barely any man in existence was worthy of capturing her attention. Suddenly, the man nudged his friend to look forward. Their eyes widened in absolute shock. Even Yuki snapped her head around. Shizuru had walked directly up to Makuto, offering him her hand for a dance. The entire hall stood paralyzed in disbelief. Meanwhile, Joe had already stepped out into the night. His subordinate stood waiting by his vehicle, bowing respectfully as they pulled the door open. Before stepping inside, he delivered a chilling warning. Absolutely no one was allowed to approach. The men swallowed hard and obeyed. The heavy doors slammed shut, leaving the guards on strict watch. One subordinate could not hide his curiosity. What was their boss doing alone in the dark with his bodyguard? His comrade immediately hissed at him to shut his mouth. Dark rumors had been circulating. Any bodyguard selected by Joe would slowly lose their mind, eventually failing to recognize their own flesh and blood. It was as if their very souls were replaced. Furthermore, these guards were rotated every few days, and the previous ones vanished without a single trace. Deep inside the shadowed vehicle, Joe sat rigidly beside his silent protector. The atmosphere grew suffocatingly heavy. Without warning, a sharp slap struck Joe across the face. A voice scolded him for holding another woman's hand directly in front of Yuki. Trembling, Joe bowed his head and begged for forgiveness. The bodyguard's ring flared with an eerie light as his facial features twisted unnaturally. He hissed that Joe was only kept breathing because of his minor usefulness. But if he continued to fail at such trivial tasks, he would beg for the mercy of a quick death. Right before his eyes, the guard's disguise melted away to reveal his true, terrifying identity. This bodyguard was the real Joe Ima. Joe stepped out into the night air. He commanded 2 guards to follow him back into the estate. The remaining men exchanged terrified glances. Just as the horrific rumors claimed, only one man had emerged. They could only dread what nightmare unfolded inside that cabin. Left behind in the darkness, the fake Joe sat bound and gagged. Tears streamed down his face, yet his eyes burned with an overwhelming killing intent. Back beneath the chandelier's glow, the orchestra continued their elegant symphony. He approached Yuki, offering a smooth apology for his brief absence. However, he quickly realized her gaze was entirely locked on the center of the room. Following her stunned stare, he froze in absolute bewilderment. It was Shizuru Suga. The high society watched in disbelief as she danced with a man. Furious whispers filled the hall. Who was this mysterious partner that none of them recognized? A delicate blush painted her cheeks, while Makuto himself looked utterly bewildered. Soon, the final notes echoed through the hall, drawing their graceful waltz to a close. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. She softly praised his flawless footwork, and he offered a warm, subtle smile in return. Before stepping onto the floor, she had warned him. To successfully sell the Zhu Yen pill to the Hoshisu family, he had to perfectly blend into the high-class atmosphere of this banquet. Luckily, the original owner of this body, his past ballroom training at the Yamore estate, was finally proving its worth. Furthermore, as a second-stage cultivator, his physical balance was absolutely flawless. That was a dangerously close call. Nana turned to Yuki, questioning if she knew about Makuto's elegant footwork. Yuki coldly dismissed the display, stating his dancing skills could never erase his commoner status. Nana merely smirked, teasing Yuki for keeping her eyes glued to the performance. Joe stepped into their circle, remarking that the Yayamori bloodline possessed a natural rhythm. Nana narrowed her eyes, pressing Joe about his supposed ignorance regarding Makuto. He calmly insisted this was their very first encounter. However, Nana subtly pushed deeper. She questioned how the mighty Ima family could fail to uncover the truth. How could they miss the background of a mere exiled son? Joe coldly explained their hesitation. Stirring up chaos inside Kungai City was too dangerous, as it remained firmly under Hoshisu family control. She declared that the methods were entirely irrelevant, but one fact remained clear. The boy possessed an absolutely terrifying aptitude for the path of alchemy. She intended to harness that boundless potential for the future, refusing to let him roam unchecked. Joe sensed the sharp edge of a threat hidden in her words. If Yuki had been absent, he would have already eliminated her, along with that worthless trash, Makuto. Whispers echoed across the hall about Shizuru's dance partner. The crowd realized he was a Yayamore. The realization hit them like lightning. This was Yuki's former fiancé. They were stunned by his audacity to attend, knowing Joe would be present. One guest sneered. He mocked Makuto for barely missing a prize far beyond his lowly station. He claimed he would have died from the sheer humiliation. Another bystander coldly agreed. Since Makuto had been completely banished from the Yamore clan, his only path forward was to desperately beg for the mercy of Lady Yuko and the Amaya family. The nobles assumed he was merely using Lady Yuki to claw his way back into noble society. Without that motive, his presence here meant absolutely nothing. Yuki, overhearing every bitter word, slammed her glass down in frustration and turned to leave. Nana urged her to stay and enjoy the evening, but Yuki coldly dismissed the offer, claiming exhaustion as she prepared to depart. Nana exhaled a quiet breath of disappointment. Suddenly, a voice stopped Makuto in his tracks. It was Yuki. She confronted him, claiming to see right through his hidden agenda. She warned him to abandon those pathetic, scheming thoughts immediately. She reminded him that the tangled webs of noble families were far more dangerous than he could comprehend. Dreaming of rebuilding the Yamore clan by using her was a completely futile endeavor. Makuto stared at her, completely bewildered by her sudden accusation. She added that refining pills would never make him rich, though it might cover his basic survival. He silently swirled the wine in his glass, letting her lecture him about staying in his lane. A confident smirk crossed his face. He asked who exactly she thought she was describing. She froze in confusion. His tone darkened as he revealed a shocking truth. Her leaking spiritual energy was entirely unintentional. Her inner flow was completely out of control. A wave of pure shock hit her. She demanded to know how he saw through her secret. He calmly explained that forcing spiritual cultivation might accelerate absorption, but it was rapidly destroying her physical body from the inside. In other words, her physical vessel had finally reached its absolute limit. Yuki locked eyes with Makuto. How could a mere commoner perceive such high-level cultivation secrets? He smoothly offered a cure. But skepticism clouded her judgment. Unfazed, he reminded her of one crucial fact. He had absolutely nothing to lose if she refused, especially while her time was rapidly running out. Leaning in close, he whispered the terms of a life-saving business deal. He entrusted her with a specific item to hand over to Joe. Watching from afar, Joe witnessed their sudden closeness, and intense jealousy flared in his eyes. As time passed, the crowd finally thinned. Shizuru and Makuto prepared to leave as well, until a sudden voice halted their steps. It was Nana. She revealed her deep interest in the Julian Yan pill and requested a private conversation. They strolled through the quiet garden. For the Grand Master of the Hoshisu family to appear personally, Makuto immediately sensed her true intentions. She desired far more than just the Juan pill. She waved off his strict formalities, gently asking him to simply call her auntie. But he firmly declined. His ties with the Yamore family were completely severed. Hearing this, she smiled faintly. He and Yuki shared the exact same stubborn spirit. After her parents passed away, Yuki fell under the iron grip of the Amaya clan. Her powerful uncle, the current patriarch, controlled her entire fate, even dictating her future marriage. Yet, by a stroke of luck, she caught the eye of an elite martial arts lineage. With their formidable backing, she secured the rare qualifications to walk the path of a legendary cultivator. However, born into a noble house, her only escape was true power. Unless she completely transcended the realm of a mere commoner, she could never escape the Amaya family's suffocating grasp. Shizuru, then, questioned what transcending this mortal realm truly meant. Makuto understood the grim reality. It meant breaking through to the third stage of cultivation. The sheer difference between the second and third stages was like heaven and earth. He instantly realized she had chosen an impossible path to gain rapid power. It would utterly destroy her physical body, sacrificing her own lifespan for a stronger cultivation base. Makuto coldly asked Nana why she was revealing this. She confessed that she had exhausted every possible method to cure Yuki's failing condition. Yet, no cure existed in this world. Just like the tragic fate of Shizuru's mother, all her medical efforts proved completely useless. Still, she desperately wanted to save the girl. She lacked the divine skill to forge a Julian pill. But Makuto's alchemy outclassed every pillmaster she had ever witnessed. Because of his profound talent, she believed a sliver of hope still remained. Shizuru was utterly stunned. Aunt Nana, the supreme president of the Traditional Medicine Association, placed more faith in Makuto than in actual medical experts. It was undeniably true that he mastered the art of refining both pills and talismans. She suddenly realized that this legendary cultivator Nana spoke of was actually him. Compared to the vast Lua continent, the cultivation arts of this world were painfully primitive. Nana then shifted her intense focus to his Juyin pills. Acting as the voice of the Hoshisu family, she proposed a grand business alliance. Shizuru immediately calculated the massive potential. With Nana's powerful backing, his pill profits would multiply at least tenfold. Nana playfully teased her for only having eyes for wealth. However, Nana's true plea was for him to save Yuki. She described the girl as a kind and incredibly fragile soul. She revealed that when the engagement was formally annulled, Yuki had actually staged a fierce rebellion. This heavy revelation left Makuto utterly speechless. Suddenly, Joe stepped out of the shadows. He called out to Aunt Nana, clearly tracking her down. He claimed he wanted to pay his respects before departing. Yet, his piercing gaze locked straight onto Makuto and Shizuru. He offered a polite thanks for the day's events, and coldly stated he looked forward to their next encounter. He slowly extended his hand. Makuto calmly replied that the feeling was mutual. But as their hands firmly grasped, a jarring sensation struck him. A distinct, undeniable spiritual energy was radiating from Joe's very body. Moments later, Joe returned to his waiting vehicle. The second he settled inside, his bodyguard presented a special gift from Lady Yuki. A dark, amused smile crossed his face. Opening the small box, he found nothing but an origami butterfly. He stared in sheer confusion, wondering what this hidden message truly meant. Whatever lay hidden inside, he left it to the decoy Joe, strictly ordering him to keep it sealed. He never intended to step onto the battlefield himself, over a pawn like Koss. He had assumed Makuto might have grown stronger, but reality proved otherwise. To him, Makuto was still the same worthless trash, so he set his sights on both him and Nana. His ring flared with ominous light as his body warped, perfectly mimicking Makuto's form. His master plan was to let Yuki execute them both, while the fake Joe beside him shook in absolute terror. He remained completely oblivious to the glowing butterfly. Meanwhile, high above the streets, Makuto stood on a towering rooftop, true to his chilling promise to Joe that they would meet again soon. A brilliant green butterfly rested in his palms. The ethereal creature took flight, descending deep into the urban abyss. It was a mystic tracking talisman, and as its glowing wings finally came to a halt, Makuto knew his prey was cornered inside. The fortress belonged directly to the Ima family. He plunged into the darkness to begin the hunt. Elsewhere, Nana carefully tended to her mystic gold flower. It was a rare gold attribute spiritual plant, known to bear its precious fruit, only once every 3 years, alongside the water attribute water spirit Rishi, which bloomed just once a year. Both treasures were on the brink of harvest. Her plan was to trade these divine herbs for vital resources at the cultivator tournament in 3 months. Suddenly, a chilling aura swept over her. Demanding to know who lurked in the shadows, a sinister voice echoed back. Truly fitting for the former genius of the 100 Herbs sect. Even burdened by crippled cultivation and severe wounds, her spiritual perception remained terrifyingly sharp. A towering monk stepped from the darkness. Panic flashed in her eyes. As she interrogated him about his identity and purpose, her mind raced, calculating that she could easily escape a single foe. But a second monk materialized, mocking her desperate thoughts of fleeing. The heavyset monk smirked, reciting an ancient proverb that even a mighty lion hunts a rabbit with absolute force. He coldly warned her that despite her tragic fall from grace, they would still crush her with their full might. She instantly realized these two were deeply cautious of her. She locked eyes with them, demanding their true objective. The massive monk ordered her to surrender quietly, warning her not to try any heroic stunts. The gaunt monk scoffed, suggesting it would be far simpler to just shatter her limbs. Her gaze hardened, reminding the intruders exactly whose territory they had breached. She promised to give them a truly unforgettable welcome. With a subtle flick, her flower unleashed a dense aroma. The monks choked, instantly covering their faces as sheer panic set in. It was a deadly mist of poison. Clamping the green heartgrass between her teeth, Nana remained completely immune to the toxic cloud. The terrifying overlord flower she had cultivated possessed enough venom to knock out an elephant. This calculated strike was her only chance to buy precious seconds. She had to flee into the night, because taking on two powerful cultivators head-on was certain death. Suddenly, a bone-chilling aura locked onto her spine. It was a terrifyingly familiar energy. A pitch-black shadow art snared her limbs. The dreadful truth dawned on her. They were from the Hidden Shadow sect. A sinister figure melted out of the darkness, mocking her perfect deduction. These were the ruthless butchers who had annihilated her beloved Hundred Herbs sect. Trembling, she demanded his identity. The fated day of their return should not have arrived so soon. She was absolutely certain these vipers would never expose themselves to the light just yet. But as his face emerged from the gloom, her blood ran cold. She stared in pure horror, believing it was our main character, but it was simply Joe Ima hiding behind a flawless disguise. Meanwhile, the perimeter guards were battling heavy eyelids. The long-awaited shift change had finally arrived. One guard groaned about his empty stomach, while his partner eagerly suggested a late-night hot pot feast. Speaking of food, one guard stood outside, curious about what Joe planned to eat in that room. The second guard brushed it off. He assumed the young master was enjoying a lavish gourmet feast, so there was simply no point in worrying about it. Little did they know, Makuto had already arrived. He moved in silence using his cloud shadow step. He halted right in front of Joe's door. Then, he released the green butterfly. It immediately fluttered upward, serving as a clear sign. His target was not inside. Meanwhile, the body double sat eating ramen while watching a drama. He had a few drinks beside him. He was living a bitterly mundane life. Frustration boiled over. He accidentally snapped his utensil, furious at why his life had turned out this way. He could not understand why he had to suffer such miserable treatment, just for sharing the same face. Dark memories resurfaced. He remembered being bound tightly inside a car. They had issued a grim warning. The consequences would be severe if people ever learned of his existence, because he was merely a shadow. He was kept alive solely for the original's convenience. A fake is strictly a fake, so he could never become the real thing. Those cruel words were permanently etched into his mind. Playing this counterfeit role was his sole value. He had been given one strict order. He was forbidden to open the box without permission, but he had zero intention of obeying. Defiantly, he pried it open. The moment the lid lifted, the butterfly escaped into the air. Panic set in. In a flash, Makuto materialized right behind him, demanding his true identity. Terror gripped the imposter. He spun around and collapsed. Now it made sense why no spiritual energy could be sensed. Makuto asked the trembling man if he recognized him. The fake suddenly remembered Makuto from the recent party. Desperate, he ordered the intruder to stay back. He frantically warned him that he was Joe Ima, but Makuto saw right through the lie. His voice turned cold as he demanded the real Joe Ima's location. Far away in a different location, hired thugs gave Joe a firm guarantee. Taking down a mere college brat would be effortless. They had studied their target. They knew the exact route the brat always took, making it the perfect spot for an ambush. They promised to shatter his arms and legs and deliver him broken. Soon a lookout informed the boss. The college brat had finally arrived. It was Makuto. As Makuto walked down the street, his mind was completely focused on the spiritual vessel. He never expected such an artifact to exist in this world. This meant there was at least a fourth-stage cultivator, backing those noble families. A spiritual vessel is a profound tool possessing various special abilities. Because these artifacts were crafted in locations overflowing with spiritual energy, the tools themselves harbor immense spiritual power. Its ultimate quality depends entirely on how much energy the forging master pours into the creation. However, the sacred art of forging was only possible starting from the fourth stage of cultivation. Achieving precise control over spiritual energy was incredibly difficult without reaching that immense level. With the world's weak spiritual energy, forging should be impossible. But if the Ima family secretly possessed a spirit spring, that would be a completely different story. Once he finishes resolving this Ima family matter, he needs to quickly locate the Ryuta spirit spring and level up. Suddenly, the hostile thugs called out from the shadows. They mocked him for keeping them waiting. They proudly revealed that someone paid a massive bounty to have him eliminated. Makuto simply glared. His piercing gaze caught them completely off guard. Shaking off the chill, the boss ordered the attack. The entire gang charged forward all at once. The boss smirked with absolute confidence. He brought highly skilled men, so losing was impossible. But in a mere heartbeat, Makuto unleashed a devastating force. The entire group was sent flying instantly. The boss stood utterly paralyzed. Makuto ruthlessly punched the next attacker, slamming his body hard into the dirt. The boss watched in sheer disbelief. He stood trembling, questioning if this monster was even human. Makuto stepped forward, coldly probing for the employer's name. Meanwhile, back at Nana Hoshisu's grand residence, the guards investigated the scene under Yuki's strict supervision. They revealed the footage from the rooftop camera. Around 1 a.m., two monks suddenly appeared, ambushing Nana on the roof. The recording cuts to black there, but it was obvious that Nana had been kidnapped. There were 3 attackers in total, and the footage captured one distinct face. It was someone from the party that day. The footage showed Makuto. She sped straight to his location, her face completely hardened with resolve. A friend had provided his exact address. Looking at the reference picture, she knew instantly that she had found the right place. She never expected Makuto to target her own family. A man approached the gate, questioning her business there. She demanded an immediate audience with his boss. In her mind, she had already condemned these men as her aunt's kidnappers. Surprisingly, she was politely ushered inside the estate. Walking toward the main doors, she noticed numerous subordinates tending to the garden, all of them appearing to be ordinary commoners. Makuto was resting comfortably on a lounge chair as a subordinate handed him water. Without hesitation, she called out his name. She fiercely demanded that his henchmen release her aunt immediately. She promised to overlook the entire incident if he complied. He simply looked completely puzzled. She demanded to know his motive for kidnapping her aunt. Instantly, his expression turned grim. He clarified the situation, realizing she actually suspected him of kidnapping Aunt Nana. She screamed at him not to play dumb, claiming she possessed concrete evidence. She revealed the video recording. On March 25th, 2022, at 1:23 a.m., he was choking Nana. Upon closer inspection, the attacker looked exactly like him. Makuto instantly realized someone had impersonated him to kidnap Aunt Nana. The man in the footage was clearly utilizing a spiritual vessel. He silently wondered if Joe had orchestrated this to drive a wedge between him and Yuki. Yuki began gathering her energy, fiercely demanding her aunt's immediate release. She threatened to strike him down using the sheer power of a cultivator. He calmly stated that he would never visit Aunt Nana's house at 1:30 a.m. He firmly told her that if she still doubted him, she could simply question Joe's own subordinates in the house. A heavy mix of shock and defeat washed over her face. The leader of the thugs presented his chat history with Joe. He confirmed their exact location with Makuto last night. He explained their initial plan to beat up Makuto and drag him to Joe. She demanded to know how he would explain the camera footage. In response, he revealed a video, taken at a completely different location for that exact purpose. The video displayed the fake Joe, confessing his true identity as Yasuhiro Yosa, Joe's official double. Normally, he served as Joe's guard, but he had attended the party disguised as his master. He revealed that he uses a ring to impersonate a guard, only exposing his true form in restricted areas. Yuki was utterly shocked to discover that Joe possessed the power to change his appearance. Makuto was absolutely certain that a spiritual vessel was being used for this deception. This revelation shook her to the core, as spiritual vessels were priceless artifacts passed down for generations, highly coveted even among noble families. Makuto explained the enemy's true intention, to impersonate him, kidnap Aunt Nana, and ultimately have Yuki eliminated. By doing so, the enemy could permanently pin the crime on him. She desperately wanted to rush out and confront Joe, but Makuto warned that acting recklessly would immediately put her aunt in mortal danger. Frustrated, she asked what her next move should be. Anger boiled within her, feeling as though he was forcing her to simply watch in total silence. However, Makuto revealed a brilliant counterattack to use the enemy's scheme against him. A dark, devilish smile crossed his face as he declared that they were going to make Joe dig his own grave. All right, that concludes today's legendary tale. For weekly chapter updates on this series, head over to my second channel, Manhwa Updater. If you refuse to miss what unfolds next, be sure to check it out and join the update gang. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay legendary, and I will see you in the next.